Hi guys, I'm Monica and welcome back to Nika Fictional Fandoms where I talk about books and everything bookish. I was kind of MIA on this channel for quite a while now because life happened, but I'm back and I read about 13 books during the month of May, June, July. I did not read a lot, but I did read some amazing books during this time and I want to talk about it. So let's begin. Of me, I read a total of 3 books. The first book I read was Gachapoche by Vivek Shanbach. It's a translated literary fiction. It's a very quick read, and it has a lot of layers to it for a short read. I like how it explores, the whole theme of money can't buy happiness. I have recommended this in one of my videos as well. I think the Asian book recommendation video, and I'll put the link to it in the cards above if you want to know more. Overall, I gave this book about 5 stars, and I highly recommend this book. Some of the themes that come to my mind is it talks about dysfunctional family dynamics, classism, and it has a very unreliable narrator. The second book I read in May was Two Night Owl from Dogfish, and it's a queer middle grade novel, and it's a very LGBT inclusive book. I specifically picked this book up because I did not want to read something that talks about the struggles of gender identity, but more like a happy queer book. And this book did just that. And it has summer camps, gay dads, and it's written in the form of letters. I have reviewed this book on my channel. If you want to know more, I'll put the link in the description or in the cards above. And overall, I give this book 5 stars. I loved this book, and I highly recommend this book if you want to read something that is queer but doesn't talk about the struggles of gender identity. The next and the last book that I read in the month of May was The Arctic Incident, which is the second book in the Artemis Fowl series. I don't think I have to give any kind of introduction for this book because I'm like really late to the party. We also have like a Disney adaptation of this book now. I want to read the whole series before I see the movie. I love the world building, the characters, the concept of this book is amazing. And I kind of like this more than the first book, especially because I could see more of the character that I really like, that is Mulch. And we also have like fairies and stuff, so definitely going to continue with the series. Overall, I give this book 4 stars. Um, I as an adult, I would say I kind of predicted the plot, which was kind of the sad part, but I can see how much I would have enjoyed reading this book as a kid. For June, which I did make a TBR video for, I did not stick to the original TBR. I managed to read about 2 books on the TBR, but I switched it up in the middle because I wanted to pick up more books that were by Black authors, specifically because with everything happening in the world. First book that I read was Invisible Woman, which was in my original TBR, and it was a book recommended to me by my colleague. It talks about the gender biased world, which is designed for men, and it is a very well researched book. And even though there's like so much information in this book, I was kind of interested to know more. It is very enlightening, and it kind of made me agitated on what I was reading, and how the system works. It covers a lot of topics. It has urban planning, product development, and medicine. And I gave this book about 4.5 stars. I think some of the elements that I want to point out is that it's a feminist book. It talks about the gender data gap and the social impacts on women because of this gap. The next book that I read was To Be Thought If Fortunate. This book was a book that I picked up because it is written by a queer author, and I was really surprised by this book. It's again not a book that talks about the struggles with gender identity. It's a sci-fi book, and it has the story of these astronauts that are sent on a mission to explore these 4 exoplanets. They're kind of waiting on to receive a message from Earth, but all the communications that they receive are like 14 years ago. That's how far they are from Earth. And their communication includes basically the changing politics and how Earth is being affected by the climate change happening, and also how the space missions are not being funded enough. So it was pretty interesting, pretty timely. And this book is kind of satisfies my curiosity and lets my imagination run wilder, I would say. And I love this book for its, how it explores what it means to be human and the basics of wonder or how much we know about the universe. And I love this book. I gave this book about 4 stars. It's a novella, I would say. It's a very short read again, and I wish it explored more um, in regards to like the interaction between the astronauts. And definitely going to be reading more from the author. I loved the writing style. Long Way Down was another book that I read in the month of June, and this was in my original TBR. I specifically picked this book up because June 5 is marked as uh, Gun Violence Awareness Day, and I wanted to pick something up that revolved around this topic. This book is about this 15-year-old boy that is kind of seeking revenge for his brother's death. The most interesting part about this book is the time frame because it's kind of set in the time that it takes for a person to go from the 7th floor to the lobby of the building through lift. And on every floor, there's a new character that is introduced to us who's affected by gun violence in some way and is connected to the protagonist. So it's a very open-ended book. It's open to interpretation, which I did not like because I wanted closure. I felt really helpless because it truly felt like a never-ending cycle of violence. And it was sad because the kind of culture that this boy has incorporated in him due to the lack of justice or community trust is pretty sad. And I think it kind of provoked me to think about the importance of sound decision making and the domino effect of actions. Um, I highly recommend this book. It is a very short read. It's a novel written in verse, so it's a very very quick read, and I found it really important and essential to be read. And I think the main character is also African American. It's written by a black author, so the perspective that it has with regards to the lack of justice and uh, community trust was pretty intense. The next book I read was New Kid, and it's a middle grade graphic novel. I love the artwork. I love the humor. Plot wise, it's pretty basic. We have a new kid that is trying to fit in his new school, but it's predominantly white, and he faces subtle racism through his teachers and fellow students. I found this pretty important because it talks about this thoughtless acts of racism that takes place and how it affects this kid on a major level and how it's embedded in him uh, internally at such a young age, which is interesting to see. And overall, I gave this book 4 stars, but I really wish that this plot explored more on that topic. The next book I read was I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. It's a very short memoir, and the themes explored in this book are so powerful and very timely. This book talks about the misogynistic mindset that the world has of what a woman should be or shouldn't be, or what a good man is or isn't. It's no way a hate speech for men or anything. It's more a hate speech for the misogynistic mindset that society has. And overall, I found this book pretty amazing. It's very hard to rate this book because it's somebody's life and it's a memoir. Um, but I love the perspective she has on gender identity and how it's okay to not fit in a box. It's pretty thought provoking. White Fragility was the last book that I read in the month of June, and this was one of the books that I picked up to educate myself during the whole recent Black Lives Matter movement. And this is pretty educational. I kind of read 50% of this book and wanted to see what other people had to say, and I realized that this had the N word used multiple times, and it could be pretty offensive. Uh, on the other hand, I found this book pretty good with what it had to say with regards to aversive racism and how it kind of plays a big part into systematic racism and how it kind of sums up to identity politics in the end. Some of the ideas in this book are quite intriguing, quite thought provoking, and honestly, something that I would have never thought of otherwise if not for this book. So I found this educational, very educational to be honest, and I would recommend this book. But again, trigger warning: it has the N word used in this multiple times. So the first book I read in the month of July was Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence, and I discovered this book through one of the episodes of Books That Made Britain, and which is airing on BBC, I guess. And this book made me very uncomfortable, and it kind of was featured as a book that talks about the working class of Britain in the 1930s. But what stood out to me was the Oedipus complex that it talks about. It has very unlikable characters. I did not like any of the characters in this book. I kind of support the taboo in a way, but it is very educational. I would not have picked up this book if it wasn't for this BBC series. And after watching Indian matchmaking on Netflix, I thought this book kind of makes it very important to know about this complex and how it would affect romantic relationships. So, pretty interesting. Love the book. I gave this book about 3.75 stars. I think I do not enjoy books that don't have likable characters, in general. But yeah, I would want to pick up more books that are recommended in this BBC series because they're quite unusual picks for some reason. The next book I read was Potionality by Michael Benzabi, and this was a book sent to me for reviewing in exchange of an honest opinion. And I was surprised by this book. It's a story of Jamila, who's only 15 years old, and she wants to flee to Paris. She is like this rebellious teen. She kind of doesn't like her father. And we also have this unrequited love featured in this book to some extent. She's a very unlikable character. I do not like her because she's very naive. And but what I like is her insights on Persian culture and Iran. This book is set in Iran, and I love those parts of the story, and I wish it explored more. The main takeaway from this book was how it talks about that how all that glitters is not gold, and it kind of made me introspect on my emotional walls that I have built while growing up, and how necessary it is to some extent, because it kind of helps you build that safety net. I gave this book about 3.75 stars ish, and highly recommend this book if you haven't picked this book up. I have also done like a detailed book review and an author interview where he talks about his reading preferences as well, and I'll link all this good stuff in the description below if you want to know more. I think the most bizarre part about this book was the monkeys in the monkey bar, because it's not an actual bar, but these monkeys were really talented and had this human side to them, and it was very hard for me to believe that something like this actually happens or was possible, and it is. I ended up watching a ton of monkey videos on YouTube for some reason, so I enjoyed this book and I want to read more from this author as well. The next book I read was My Hair is Beautiful. It's a picture book, and I acquired it from NetGalley. It's a pretty straightforward book. It has styled or natural afro hairstyles with their respective names, and it's featured with a very cute kid having those hairstyles. I found it very educational, especially for toddlers and school-going children, because it helps them embrace different types of hairstyles on people of color, and I would want this to be added to the school libraries as well, so they kind of learn this in a young age academically as well. So good book and highly recommend it if you have toddlers. The next book that I read was Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy, and this was a much needed time management book that I needed, especially because I was struggling to fit everything in my schedule. I loved how there are so many actionable tips in this book, and I have put most of them in use, and I can see the effects in my tool list, specifically how I'm able to tackle most of my things. It's not very revolutionary, I would say. It's very basic advice, but what I like is that it has that kind of actionable exercises to put in use, and it talks about these different ways how not to procrastinate, and how to get more things done in less time. So highly recommended if you're struggling with time management. Overall, I'm glad I read this book, and I find it difficult to rate self-help books, so I'm not going to rate this, but I would definitely want you to pick this up if you're struggling with time management. So it's kind of a classic in time management self-help books. So yeah, so that's it. That's all the books that I have read during these months. As you can see, I did not read a lot, but most of the books that I read were like pretty good. And I did pick up more books, but I did not finish them. I didn't want to force myself to finish them if I wasn't enjoying them. I was already in a reading slump. Hopefully I do pick them up and finish them by the end of the year. No pressure, but yeah. And anyways, that's it. And I would love to know if you have read any of these books and what you think of these books. Like always, I have mentioned all the reviews that I have done on the blog in the description below if you want to know more. And hopefully I stick to my video uploading schedule from now on. Until then, happy reading, and I'll see you in another video. Ta-da!